All right, y'all can sit down. Don't worry. That's it. Don't worry about it. That's actually my favorite song. It's called Life is a Carnival. And it basically says life is a carnival, and it's just better to live life by singing and dancing. And I love that because sometimes when life is happening, when everything is going on, sometimes you stress out so much that you forget to really enjoy the beautiful side of things. And you forget to dance and sing a little bit. So now that we're reaching towards the end, we have a really, really special conversation with two amazing people. Tom and Elena Chavez, a brother and sister duo that I've had the pleasure of meeting before. I'm going to do a quick introduction on them before I call them onto the stage, and you'll see a little bit why these folks are so amazing. So Tom, he is a serial technology entrepreneur who lives in San Francisco. Tom started and sold two venture-backed tech companies, Wrapped in 1999, which was sold to Microsoft back in 2017, and Crux, which started in 2010 and was then sold to Salesforce in 2016. Today, he also serves as the CEO of the Chavez Family Foundation. He holds a BA in computer science and philosophy from Harvard and a PhD in engineering, economic systems, and operations research from Stanford University, where he was a NASA doctoral fellow. Elena Chavez Quesada is the Senior Director of Expanding Access to Opportunity at the San Francisco Foundation, and she's also the Head of Investments at the Chavez Family Foundation. Elena is also a founding partner for the Closing the Women's Wealth Gap Initiative, a mayoral appointee to the San Francisco Citizens Committee on Community Development and other advisory steering committee related to economic security. Elena received a bachelor's from Harvard University and a master's in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me give a warm welcome to Tom and Elena Chavez. Awesome. Well, you all are probably meeting them for the first time, but let me give you a little bit of background on who they are and their families. So Tom and Elena are born and raised in a second-generation Mexican-American family. While neither of their parents graduated college, all five of their children, Marty, Rick, Tom, Andrea, and Elena, graduated from Harvard. Right? I know, snap, what? Crazy, right? Now, family legend has it that their mom, Rose, as a teenager, vowed that she would become a nun or she would have 10 children go to Harvard. Now, legend or not, Rose and Ray Chavez sent all five of their kids to Harvard. And that, to me, is amazing. So, today, we have the honor of being able to chat with them a little bit and learn about really what was the secret sauce to get them to where they are today. To start off, I really want to ask you two, can you tell us a little bit about what your childhood was like and where you grew up?
Well, as you mentioned, we're from Albuquerque, New Mexico. We come from a proud Mexican-American family. I have 70 first cousins. We have 70 first cousins, so it's that kind of extended family. We grew up, as you're mentioning, with our mom. She is a very fierce lady, and that's not a legend. She really did say, I'm going to have 10 kids and I'm going to send them all to Harvard. The good Lord only saw fit to give her 5 kids.
Right.
She got the job done. And so look, we grew up in a context where our mom and our dad used to drill it into us every day, every night at the dinner table. You know, you're Mexican, nobody expects much from you. We expect you to work 100 times harder than anybody else. And to just keep your nose clean, keep your priorities straight, and you can do it. So we also grew up in this kind of context where, sorry about that. Check one. Hopefully this works.
Can y'all hear him okay?
Am I okay?
Yes. Okay, awesome.
I think for us there was a lot of love, a lot of support.
Yeah.
Very, very high expectations always.
Awesome. Awesome. And I think that's a testament to a lot of Latina moms as well. I definitely, when I first heard about your story, I thought a lot about my mom. Like, it was never a matter about if I was going to college, it was about where I was going to college. And so I think that's definitely a testament to like the culture that we have in our families, that really kind of sets the bar for everybody else. And then can you talk a little bit about kind of what Albuquerque was like and the household that y'all were raised in as well?
Is this working? Can you guys hear me? So it was a really very strict household, and as Tommy said, the expectations were really high. But I think and education loomed large for our family, for our parents, and but I want to say that education was not first, and so my parents were very clear that there were 3 priorities in our lives, and it was God, family, education, in that order. And she drilled that into us every day, multiple times a day. And, you know, I wanted to just share, so our parents were recently in a really bad car accident in Albuquerque, and we have been taking care of them, brought them back to San Francisco, and it's been tough. And so one of our cousins who's been really involved sent me an email, and I just wanted to share it because I think it really summarizes kind of what our growing up was like and what my mom is like. She said, your mom, and your dad sort of, but mostly your mom, has been taking care of business since before you guys were born. She made a decision in life way before you guys were born. When you all came along, she had plans for you. And quite honestly, whether you guys felt you lost out on some piece of your childhood for studying so much, for not being able to watch cartoons whenever you wanted, or slack off with your homework when you wanted, etc., she prepared each of you for a great, fun, and successful life. She's given you everything she wished she would have had as a child. Bottom line, she was born into a life of poverty where the world was more prejudiced and it wasn't shielded by words or clothes. She takes great pride in each of you. She had a life of having to be better than others just to be taken seriously in this world, a life of not being given opportunities and being looked down upon because of your heritage or where you live or how you speak. A life not of fighting, but of learning. Your mom, first of all, graduated from high school, something none of the others in the Marquez family did, right? And she went to work for the best place in Albuquerque at that time. That was a big deal. And she even furthered her dreams by hooking up with your dad. These are all huge steps in a person's life, stepping away from something you are comfortable with for something new, something strange, and something unknown. She made these choices not knowing how it would all turn out. As far as she's concerned, she got all her wishes with each of you. But we've not seen your mom's ending and all these amazing life choices she made.
Well, wow, yeah, you can snap, clap, all of that. That's amazing. Well, I hear a lot of resiliency in that as well, and determination to really make your family move forward. That's amazing. Well, clearly your parents have had a huge impact on your life. I mean, what would you say is the best piece of advice that they've given you?
Well, I think I touched on it briefly and just to amplify what Elena said, there was a lot of grit, a lot of determination, very high expectations. There was also a chip on my mom's shoulder, which we inherited, this feeling of not being respected, not being taken seriously, showing up and everybody's just sort of averaging down and not expecting much. One of the other dinner stories we got every night was about the sewage treatment plant in her backyard. Her family had finally saved just enough money to get a little casita in a place, and as soon as they got there, Albuquerque built a sewage treatment facility literally in their backyard. Wow. So just the shame and the anger around that was just really primal, right? We grew up with that idea of the sewer in your backyard, and it became an emblem of everything that we needed to transcend and go beyond. So no, it was, there was all of those aspects. I think the main lesson that I internalized from my parents was just first, conviction that you can. You know, you can be better, you can do more. There's no room that you can't go into. There's no table where you shouldn't sit down. But if you're going to get there, you're going to have to work 100 times harder than anybody else because no one's expecting it. And the final thing she would say is, and you have to be 10 times smarter than the Anglo because you don't, if when you go to Harvard, and she did say, when you
Yeah.
go to Harvard, you don't want everybody to say it's just because you're Mexican, right? So the value of hard work and just not relenting, I think, is the main message there.
Definitely. Can I get just hands in the audience if you've ever felt something like this before as well? Hands? Yeah? Yeah. I mean, definitely. It's something that I resonate with also. Again, we can talk about it. Where we are, we're in the Central Coast, Watsonville, not that different from parts of Albuquerque, not that different from parts of Stockton, California. So, thank you.
And just to add a couple of things that she would say, that I think about all the time, is that there's always going to be someone smarter than you, better looking, funnier. And at the time, I'd be like, God, that's so harsh. Like, why are you telling me that? But the point of that was, like, it just focus on don't compare yourself to other people. Focus on yourself, work hard, and as long as you're trying your hardest and working hard, like that's what's important. The other thing I'll just say, we grew up in a family with three boys. They were first, and then my mom had two girls. And interesting to see how dynamics play out, gender dynamics play out in Latino families. And we could go on all day about that, but one thing that that my mom did say loud and clear, that was really, I think there were other ways in which the gender roles played out in a more traditional way in our family, but she always drilled in, like, don't ever depend on a man. And and just growing up hearing that was pretty formative.
But I was there for those conversations. I would say, by the way, we should also quickly note, my mom is fierce and gets a lot of attention to the point about gender dynamics. We had a dad who was doing the dishes and making the tortillas and, doing the chores. So that we grew up with that.
Yeah.
None of that other stuff. But I remember our mom coming and saying, when you get older, you never want to depend on a man to take care of you. It's that kind of thing.
Like that. That's awesome. Well, Tom, let me ask you a direct question. You've accomplished them as a successful entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and all these different things that you've done in your life. But what would you say that you are the most proud of?
I think the thing I'm probably most proud of is just having taken this journey with family and friends close. Like, that's the thing that makes me happiest and brings me the most joy. I'm lucky to work in these companies that I build, and I've always thought it's just crazy when people talk about their jobs and my job sucks, and everybody in the college, and no one's not feeling inspired or joyful.
Right.
And I just feel so lucky to work with great friends and colleagues who are always teaching me new things and challenging me in new ways. So I think the thing that I'm most proud of is just the way that I've been lucky to sort of take this journey.
That's awesome. And a good nugget of advice for everybody here to just always bring your authentic self, right? And like bring your true selves throughout any space that you're in. Sometimes we can go into places where we're the minority, or maybe where we feel like we just don't belong, and we tend to like chameleon ourselves into something else. But it's important to keep true to ourselves and also to keep those that keep us real in our lives. On that note, and then you're the youngest of the 5 siblings, right? What does family and culture really mean to you? Like how do you bring your full self to work every day?
For me, I ground myself in family. That's where it all starts and ends. There are good days and bad days at work. I'm very lucky to work in a place where I feel like I can bring my authentic self to the job every day, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But for me, obviously our parents and our family looms large. It's not all rosy. So I will also talk about that, because I think a lot of times in our family story, when I graduated from Harvard, the 5th kid in a Latino family, it was a big deal. We were on the Today Show, and like we talked to, well, now doesn't sound so great, but we talked to Matt Lauer at the time, and we had.
He was very respectful.
But there are a lot of other challenges that I think are important to point out that haven't always been kind of super direct about, and I think it's important as we share our story, any of us, a story of success, that we also talk about what wasn't so great. And the reality is, we have in our family rampant, right, like a long history of suicide, mental health issues, addiction, incarceration. Like, this is all part of our family story too. And I just feel like that's important to say. But, I can see you being like, wow, 5 kids and they went to Harvard. That is great. But I think I can say what makes me who I am and to do the kind of work I do. I'm not in tech. I work in philanthropy for a very kind of social justice type foundation called the San Francisco Foundation, with a very explicit focus on racial and economic equity. And I think it's just important to call that out, that, we all have history, we all have, trauma, we have shame, we have things that, we're struggling with every day. So I think the barrier for me of bringing my full authentic self has been really internal. It has been talking myself out of something before I even started. It's been kind of shutting myself down in a meeting without even starting to express my view. And I think a lot of that comes from feeling like I don't belong in certain rooms, I'm not supposed to be there, there are so many people who are a lot more talented, or whatever it is. And I've really struggled with that. It's really, really held me back. And it has taken me a long time to get to a point where I started putting myself out there little by little. Every meeting, I'd start to talk more. I did not do this in school, through college, grad school. I never spoke up. And I started to realize, like, the more I put myself out there, the more people responded. Like, I actually had something valuable to offer. And other people believed that all along, but I didn't. And so I will say that when that narrative stopped for me, and when it wasn't like a quick thing, it was a journey. But when that narrative of shutting myself down before I'd even started stopped, my career has taken off. And so I think that would be, and we haven't gotten to this question yet, but I think what I would tell my younger self is, it sounds crazy. I know you really feel like you shouldn't be here. Just pretend. And I honestly, like, sometimes it's just that act of like, even though I think this is ridiculous, I'm gonna say something and I'm gonna try. And you will find, little by little, you start to build up that confidence, and people respond to that. They respond to the energy that you're putting out in the world.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you, Elena. Now, I guess for the two of you, like, what would you say are some of the biggest roadblocks that you've faced kind of along this path as you've been living your lives? And maybe what are also some of the biggest risks that you've taken?
Well, I think the biggest roadblocks were just coming from humble circumstances, having the ambition that we had in our family, but not the framework for how to actually do it, right? Mm-hmm. Starting with going to college. Right. How do you do that exactly? Nobody in our family had done that. So, it's not an impossible disadvantage, but it's an obstacle for sure. Mm-hmm. And I think it's funny for me because now in my day job, I work with other tech people and venture capitalists, who sit at the dinner table with their kids, teaching them the difference between common shares and preferred equity shares, and these kids are growing up with a framework, right? And there's no mystery, and that's something that I think we generally in this community, and I got to give big ups here to Jacob and what we're doing with Digital Nest, is to create the framework, right, for people to understand. First, it's possible. Second, exactly how do you do this? So those obstacles, I think. But sort of along the lines of what Elena was saying, and I've had similar struggles, and the main thing I would want anybody here listening to really understand, if Elena and I have a single message, is if there's noise in your head that's telling you that you can't, or you shouldn't, or you don't belong, just remember that's noise in your head, right? Abraham Lincoln once said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, listen, if you think you're up or you think you're down, either way, you're probably about right, right? Which is to say, we create these mental states that either take us to the promised land or keep us where we don't want to be. The biggest risks that I've taken, I think, for me are mostly, well, maybe 3 risks. There was a period of my life when I was going to be a big rock star. So I had stopped all of this computer science stuff, and I'd taken 2.5 years. And I was down in LA, and I was shopping my demos and trying to get record deals and stuff. And
I did not know this about you.
yeah. And I've never been on the Billboard Top 20, never made it, right?
Yeah.
But it was a really crazy, by the way, my mom was about to die.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
Oh, Tommy, no, don't do that. But it was a risk though, and I'm glad that I took it, right? I threw my hat in the ring, and I tried to be a successful musician. The other risks are the companies that I've started, right? Where you're starting from scratch, you're hanging a shingle out. The first company, I'm 28. I know a couple things, but
Yeah.
I have no business really running around Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto, knocking on doors, trying to get my company funded. And that was part of the joy of it too, is like not knowing all of the terrible things that were going to happen to me. Like if I knew all those things, I would never do it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, those were, I think for me, starting these companies, especially the first one. The second one was awesome because you know more about what you're actually doing.
Yeah.
But the first one was just nuts.
Yeah. On the musical note, all 5 of you actually learned to play instruments, and you have a sister that's a violinist. Is that correct? Yeah. Awesome.
That was part of the Rose Chavez. You will play a musical instrument. We play piano. We have a brother who's a classical guitarist. Andrea is
a violinist.
Violinist, yeah.
That's awesome. Very cool. And then what about you? What were your biggest risks that you've ever taken?
I think for me, I'm the youngest of 5 by a lot. Like there were 4 of them, and then 9 years later, I showed up. And so, I have an interest. We have a different story, right? Tommy and I have a bit of a different narrative. In that I also had 6 parents. Like they all had very strong opinions about what I needed to do and where I needed to head, and it was, math and science all the way. That's what it has to be. This sounds so trivial, but for me, kind of charting my own path and really focusing on issues that are deeply, personal to me that I think require a tremendous amount of leadership, especially today, around, racial and economic equity, basically, is, that for me was a big deal to kind of chart that path in our family. It was not certainly the thing that I was encouraged to do by my 6 parents, and I'm really proud of that. I think it was a departure, but what's really interesting is just like how things kind of come full circle. Like if you look at kind of the arc of the story and see how he's been very successful. I've built my career in the nonprofit field and now work in philanthropy and feel like we're a good team. And really privileged to be able to work with organizations like Digital Nest and get to see like these incredible leaders like Jacob, like the folks at the Latino Community Foundation. It's super humbling and it's really rewarding. So I think, sometimes taking that risk of just like deviating from what everybody says you should be doing, whatever that is, like this is your path, this is what our family's done, this is what you should do, and to break out of that and to be uncomfortable. I think that's a big theme for me is, to make myself uncomfortable. I feel like if I'm not a little bit uncomfortable, I'm probably not doing something right. So I try to take little risks in that way all the time.
Well, today, everybody here actually has been meeting with some employers, and a lot of these folks are talking to employers maybe even for the first time. Now, one of the things that I struggled with also, just going through college and trying to even find a job, was finding a mentor. It was not a concept that was super familiar to me. Like, I talked to people, I had teachers that I liked, but I didn't really understand that concept of what a mentor was and what they were supposed to be in my life. And many of us don't have parents that went to high school or college here or at all. So how were you both able to find mentors, and how did they end up becoming your mentor?
Yeah, so I chased down, I had an advisor in college, actually I had 2 advisors in college who were really formative for me. I was kind of shameless, I just kind of like latched onto them and started chasing them around and signing up for extra studies with at least one of them. And I think that that's one of the key things about, sometimes I find younger folks who are looking for a mentor kind of feeling like that mentor there will be a cloud and the mentor will come down and then we'll be right there for them. And that's not how it works, right? You go after your mentors, you latch on, and you insist that they start to teach you some things. And I'm psyched when I see people, and you're never able to be in all the places you'd like to be, but when I see folks at that earlier stage of their career or their education, just looking for bits of advice and eagerly seeking it, and you can sort of tell, sometimes people, here's my other bit of advice, is sometimes people go and seek advice or mentorship with the hope that the mentor will just affirm what they want to do, please just tell me that I'm, and sometimes the best mentorship is where you're getting your frame of reference jiggled and you're being told something that isn't comfortable, right? And so being open to all of the input that you can receive from all of the people who are willing to give it to you. By the way, a lot of these folks are wrong too. Knowing who not to listen to is at least as important as finding wise mentors and cleverly latching on if you can. So, but it is, the summary of it is it's really on you to find your mentors and go after them.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. I mean, I think sometimes we kind of look up to somebody, and once we've chased them down and get them, it's like, okay, whatever you say, I'm going to do. I think it's a really strong point of input, but it's not necessarily, you need to maintain your sense of self and seeking out these mentors. And I did not chase down folks the way he did. Again, we are very different. and I would say later on in my career, it clicked for me that people really like to mentor. Like, people want to share their story. People want other folks to not make the same stupid mistakes they made. People like to talk about their career path and what they would do differently. So instead of thinking of it as an imposition on somebody, I just want to leave you with, like, please realize people want that and they're flattered. And so you should go after them and be persistent, and it could be an incredibly valuable long-term relationship.
It's so funny we're talking about this because, in fact, this morning I was on the phone for an hour getting advice from that first investor who funded my first company when I was 28. Wow. And I had no business. He's a very celebrated, now famous billionaire in Silicon Valley. And I'm launching a whole new a set of companies now where, I'm taking some shots too. It's maybe just redonkulous, but I got to keep my saw sharp, and I got to take some new shots. So it's, to Elena's point, he really wants to be on the phone with me for an hour and 15 minutes this morning, coaching me, right, on what to do next. And, I'm older now, but it's important to me that I still be eager to receive the guidance he's willing to give me.
Yeah, for sure. I totally hear that. And go for it. That's the message, right? You have to go for it. I want to just do a quick shout out. I don't know if she's still here. Valeria. There she is. Valeria came up to me during lunchtime and she was like, oh my gosh, you're Peruvian. I'm Peruvian. We got to meet up. And she asked me directly, she's like, can you be my mentor? And I was like, yes, I can. So, that's one of those things too. Like, you just have to go for it and ask people because it's so important. The worst I could have said was no. Right? And then she's like, all right, cool. And then she goes and asks somebody else. That's the worst they can do is say no. I have one quick question because I know we have to head over to Q&A really fast, but I'd like to know, what is your hope for the future and how do these people in the audience fit into that?
I'll take that one, Tommy.
Look, I think my hope for the future, and especially for the folks in this room, is that you start to really leave today and change your psychology and believe that you can. Just to know and to have conviction that you've got it, you belong, there's no room that you shouldn't walk into, there's no table that you don't have the right to sit at, right? You've got this. If you're willing to do the 100 push-ups every day, if you're willing to get yourself out there, take some risks, take some shots, right? And make that a lifelong habit. I mentioned a minute ago, I'm scared shitless right now that I'm about to start a bunch of companies and some of them are gonna fail. That really worries me. I'm already lurching up out of bed at night like, oh my God, right? Oh my God. That's okay, right? And by the way, I'm really, really old, so you think like, well, you should be past that now. But no, you never get past that, right? You gotta keep on chiseling away at it, taking shots, taking risk, not being afraid to fail, right? My musical career was 2.5 years long. I failed. That's okay, because there's so much other good stuff on the backside of it.
All right, well, thank you two so much. I told you, they're amazing, right? Yes. Okay, so now all of you have the opportunity to ask some questions. So do we have any questions in the audience? I think my buddy Steve over here is going to walk over to anybody that has any questions.
Why don't you engage the audience? The AV guy can fix Tom's mic so that we can then use
Oh, sure.
for the audience.
Sure. All right, so anybody have any questions for them? Don't be shy. I've got more, but I mean, it's more fun if you do it. I see one right there.
Where is it? There we go. There you go. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. All right. Okay. So, sorry, I'm like really nervous talking to you guys, but so I myself, I'm also a child of 2 immigrant parents, and I was taught a lot about values. And I heard a common theme from you guys, which your values were education, and that really like resonated within me, because I was taught a lot about to value my culture, to value my education, but to also value my failures from my parents. They taught me to value my failures because to value your failure, it means that you take confidence and pride in the process from failure, and it leads to success. And with that in mind, I'm the first generation college student in my family to go to college, so I'm really like humbled and honored by that. And I value education like all of you up there do as well. And I heard that you guys attended like prestigious colleges like Harvard, Stanford, and so forth, and Berkeley as well. And I really love education, and hopefully one day I wish to attend a grad school, such as either like Cornell or Princeton one day, hopefully. And as fellow alumni from those schools themselves, how would you recommend a student who hasn't attended like a prestigious school, like I go to CSUMB and everything, to one day cultivate the pathway that would lead to one potentially that school in the future?
Well, and I'm on, that's good. So look, I think, first, congratulations in blazing that path in your family. Keep on keeping on, don't relent. I think if you if you're willing to work 100 times harder, right, and really put your education first, and to not be, look, it's also easy to get distracted. It's easy to get taken off your game. If you want to show up and compete, you can compete for those positions. And a lot of those, I remember when I was in graduate school at Stanford, sure, there were some kids from prestigious universities, but there were a lot of really great students from many, many other places, many other state schools, who were just as talented, in many cases much more talented than the fancy pants. So if you're willing to do the work, you absolutely have that shot.
And I just want to say, I think clearly you have incredible parents. To be able to have that be a core value that you talk about and recognize and own and celebrate your failures was just amazing. And you know, I think going to a prestigious graduate school is an amazing opportunity, no doubt. And I think depending on the kind of graduate school or graduate education you want to get, you know, they value different things. So some value a high LSAT score, it depends, right? But I think a lot of them increasingly value real world experience. They value getting out there, hustling, working hard, being out there in the workforce, doing good stuff, and they value life experience. So I think it's really, this is what I think we're trying to say, is like, it's the whole you. It's not just like your grades or whatever. It is where you come from. It is your parents, your family, like all of those things to be celebrated and amplified, and that actually make you a stronger candidate than the fancy pants.
I'll tell you something funny. I hire a lot of people over in my companies and over the last 20 years. In one of my companies, we actually instituted a ban on any Harvard or Stanford MBAs for a period of about 4 years. Because we had all these people coming in, and they were just so entitled. They were all smoking their own stash and had convinced themselves that they're these gods of industry. They weren't humble. They weren't they weren't really willing to do the work. And in fact, you know, this is the funny thing for people I work with, where we do see candidates come through now from Harvard or Stanford, and I'm the one saying like, not so, you know, give me a hardworking person with who's proved it at state schools and gotten, you know, is in it to win it. We want to hire those folks. Frankly, I want to hire those folks because I think we've just had a lot more success, right? Because they don't have that sense of entitlement than the fancy pants.
And if you look at the numbers, right, the data bears it out. So if you look at entrepreneurs, Latinos are way overrepresented. We're talking, you know, Fortune 500 entrepreneurs, and then your kind of mom and pop small business entrepreneurs. So, I mean, I think the data bears it out. There's also an incredible amount of data that shows that women entrepreneurs are often a better investment. So I think, you know, it is about the data as well backing this up to say, like, you know, we are really successful, and people do want to give us that shot.
Is there another audience question right here, over here? Oh.
Elena, I remember you mentioning fake it till you make it. A lot of us, or it seems the crowd is a little bit younger, would you say we shoot for the stars and go for that next level up, or as opposed to entry level and fake it until you make it? Or would you say get in ground floor and just work your way up?
Wow, that's a great question. I have to say, I lean towards, you know, not starting at the bottom, but starting at a place where, you know, it's realistic, right? Like if you don't have 10 years of work experience, like that's just not going to be a realistic expectation to be in that position. And I think there is a little bit of an ethos in our family, especially with me and Tommy, of just like putting in the hard work. proving yourself. And so that I find that, folks that have started out, at a lower level position who are just like completely killing it, tend to just move up, and people see that. They recognize talent within a short period of time. That you can move up quickly. And I think having that ethos of like, I remember my first job out of college, it was basically answering letters for a senator. So I was working in Capitol Hill at the very, very, very bottom of the heap. And I was just like, I'm gonna get through my pile of letters. And like that was, and then once I had proved myself, then they're like, oh, okay, maybe you can start doing some other stuff. So I think that would be my leaning. That being said, I've also had a lot of young women that I've been mentoring recently who are applying for jobs that they are way overqualified for. And that drives me crazy. And I think you get into a mental state where it's like, I'm not good enough for that. So I'm not saying, not to shoot for the stars. I'm saying like, shoot for something that's realistic and, work your ass off, and people will see that.
And if I can actually add to that, my parents raised me to believe I was the best thing since sliced bread. So, and I right by the last semester before I graduated, I took a class, a business case for investing in women, and they talked about that, how women don't apply for a job unless they fit 100% of everything that's on the qualifications list. And I was like, okay. So when I went into the job search, I knew kind of what I was going into. And when I started with the Latino Community Foundation, I did start off as an executive assistant, but when they were hiring for somebody that had 10 plus years of experience. And I looked at the qualifications, and I was like, I could do that. Like I said, I haven't even had a real job yet, but I was like, I could totally do that. And I applied, and I got in. And within a year and a half, I moved out to, I'm now the operations manager of the foundation, right? And so I would say, in my case, I was able to do that because I was able to prove the skill set. Mind you, my first week of work, I was Googling everything. What is an endowment? What exactly does a foundation do again? Things like that. But and in that case, I was able to fake it until I made it. And my boss and I actually had a conversation about a year after I started, and she was like, I'm glad you're asking questions now. Because I wasn't in the beginning, because I was trying really hard to just do everything. And it worked out in my case.
Thank you.
Yeah. Questions? Oh, I see a hand back there, and I see a hand here in the front. So maybe we'll start here, and then we'll go back to you.
Okay, during the 2.5 years you said you were pursuing a music career, what type of music, like what genres were you
Great
blending,
question.
There
or,
we
you know?
go.
Curious minds want to
Now
know.
we're chopping it up. I love, it was pop and hip hop, and it was kind of a mashup.
Dope.
I'm a huge hip hop star. So to that last question, it was for my sister, but yes, set something realistic. As they say in hip hop, you got to crawl before you ball.
Yeah, we had a question back there.
I guess my question is, I have hopes in the future to make my company, like you, Tom. So, although this advice won't serve me now, for future reference, any advice for starting out a company, specifically a tech company?
Well, as I mentioned, the beauty for me was to not know all the bad things that were going to happen, because if I knew them, I would never have gotten off the couch. But I think, the main, look, I guess it's such a great question. It's worthy of a more thoughtful answer than I feel I can serve up here in the moment. But the first thing is to just be, speaking of being realistic, know, okay, I have this idea, and a lot of people in Silicon Valley have ideas. These days especially, everybody has an idea for an app, right? We all have friends like, oh, I got this great idea for an app. Okay, that's good, but let's get real about how are you going to do it, right? It's not just the what, but it's the how. And for you personally, like, what can you know that's distinctive, right? And that gives you some kind of meaningful, sustainable edge, such that as you start plowing into the idea, you know how you're going to be 10 times cooler, better, faster, cheaper than something else, right? And so just really getting maniacal about, and sharpening your own saw, right? I mean, for me, my journey was in my first company. I had finished graduate school and I had all this math that I'd done, and I lovingly refer back to that company as exactly the kind of company that a freshly minted Stanford applied math PhD would do. Like I knew these things, and I had a lot to learn about how to build the business, but at least I was able to show up with that distinctive thing that helped the company along. And I think the nature of tech is that. And now the other thing that people need to realize is everybody thinks it's just about math and coding. There are lots of ways to show up in tech, right? It's about how do you bring the product to market? How do you service the product for customers? How do you sell it? I mean, so the marketing and sales and service aspects are at least as important as all of the geekery that goes on in tech. So, but in those sectors as well, just knowing what your sort of core competitive differentiator could be or will become over time is, I think, the most important thing.
Thank you.
Hello. First, I want to say thank you. And my name's Yvette. And this is really like just hearing all these conversations, it's really inspiring because I constantly always like think about like all these like, kind of like Elena says, like all these social justice and issues and like how I can better myself to better my community. So I'm curious, like your foundation, because I'm also like a social justice major with a minor in tech. So I'm trying to figure out like, okay, I really want to dive into these topics, but I also really want to start my own foundation to help people out. Like, how did you begin to think about that, like starting your own foundation and really like putting it into practice into your life?
Well, so we started the foundation about 1.5 years ago, and the premise was really just to, in some sense, and we call it the Chavez Family Foundation in honor of our parents. So we want to pay it back, we want to pay it forward, we want to honor the values that they taught us, which is why we focus on education, entrepreneurship, immigration very heavily. And so that's the sort of the premise and the reason why we started the foundation. I also like to so I come at this from a tech perspective. I also love to tell people I have such great taste. I picked this little sister who works full-time in philanthropy and service, and so just already knows all of the traps, right? Knows exactly, and I'm following her around, just learning from her as we figure out, how do you do this well, right? Because there are a lot of foundations, and I'm going to turn it to you here in a minute. There's a lot of opportunity to try to do good, and that's very nourishing. But if you're going to be really responsible about it, I think, you want to really focus on how do you have the highest possible impact per dollar invested, right? That's a different kettle of fish than just showing up with good intentions. So the program management and the investment discipline that Elena brings is the most important function of the foundation, really.
Yeah, I think, I'm a very fierce critic of the field of philanthropy, so maybe we can talk offline about some of the pros and cons of working in philanthropy and the power of philanthropy and the limitations of philanthropy. I think, we were in this very unique position where, there was a sale of a company, allowed us to kind of start this, and I've worked for several foundations now, and I think, this is an amazing opportunity to kind of do it the way we want to do it, and to bring our values and our parents' values to the table and invest in the intersection of immigration, education, and entrepreneurship. What I would say is like at the center of that is relationships and leaders. And you can get caught up in reporting and metrics and all of that, and those are important. Accountability is important. Finding really effective organizations is, it's an art and a science. And at the end of the day, when you talk about social justice, these are people's lives. These are complicated lives. These are intersectional issues. If, it were a math equation, we would have solved it, but it's not. And it's very, very complex. So I think what really grounds us in the way we approach this work is with a great deal of humility, because the organizations that we're supporting are the ones really doing the hard work. And I would say, we want to help champion those leaders who are kind of out in the community. And I think that integration that you mentioned of tech and social justice is like incredibly powerful and very fascinating. And I think, to be honest with you, there's probably a lot more you could do with that outside of philanthropy in bringing those two together. So that's just my 2 cents.
And we have time for one more question. I saw somebody's hand right here in the front. Yeah.
I wrote it down. So most of the advice and things that you guys have been saying are really helpful, and they go towards, I feel like, helping those in the workforce or those who are preparing to enter the workforce. But my question is, what advice would you give to a high school student, such as myself, who, in order to reach that point of being ready to enter the workforce and getting me ready to enter the workforce?
I'll start. I think a lot of the same advice applies, honestly. I think that finding and being persistent about finding mentors is really critical. And I wish, like I said, I was a very, very, very shy high school student who didn't want to inconvenience anybody. And I think this is actually the time to start breaking out of that mold and that narrative, if that's where you're at. And it's also a really interesting time to have summer internships, where it's like a quick thing. And back to our earlier point that people like to mentor. So summer interns are a great opportunity to there'll probably be some stuff that's not so interesting, but if you can cultivate those relationships in high school, you might, if you want to come back to your community or you want to take off and go somewhere else, I guarantee you those relationships that you start cultivating in high school can be kind of the linchpin and really powerful for propelling you forward.
And they also make you really interesting to colleges, right? So just the commitment to service is something that I think anybody should make under any circumstances. And not just for the reason that it looks good on a college application, but it's a way to sort of flesh out the whole picture of you.
Right.
And bring that to the fore, because when you do start to apply for colleges, those admissions officers aren't just looking at grades and test scores, they're looking at all of you. And so really investing in academic achievement, of course, but in service that ties back to your community in a way that's authentic also for you, right? So what do you believe? Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you, admissions officers can see right through the BS, right? When somebody's selling them a shiny story, and really, does this person really care about, Australian blowfish, or is that just a story? So do the things that are authentic for you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Tom, Elena. You both are phenomenal. I'm sorry? Okay. Do we have time for one more? I think yeah. Let's do one more. Yeah.
Well, I'm in the earliest stages of launching what we call a venture studio, where instead of launching a single company, we're going to be launching multiple companies in parallel. So right now we're hatching and scheming and laying down plans. When we get into the air, which we hope will be within the next sort of 3 to 6 months, we're going to be hiring engineers and operations and customer sales folks. Now these are early crews where you have, a team of 6 to 7 or 8 people that you're feeding ideally with a single pizza. But then the company starts to grow, and then you start to hire on more people. But that's right now in the short term, and there's this funny thing for me, like there are periods where you kind of have to just pick up the whole thing and carry it up the hill a little bit. So like this is the part where I earn my keep and figure out the plan and enroll the right investors and get everybody marshaled behind it. In 3 to 6 months, hopefully we're actually underway and hiring engineers, operations, salespeople.
Well, thank you again, Tom and Elena. When I think about Tom and Elena, I don't just see them as the wonderful professionals that they are, but they are truly leaders and examples of how we lift while we rise, right? So thank you both so much for your time today. Everybody, please, thank you.